Hoy hoy. Welcome in, welcome in. I am Tyrell Maclachlan. You can follow me on Twitter at TNFFTyrell. Make sure you're following the website at TrueNorthFFB at TrueNorthFFB.com is where you can find the rankings, all the content, all that good stuff. So I am going to stick along the sophomore slant perspective here. We're going to talk another wide receiver. Somebody I'm also buying is going to be Hollywood Marquise Brown, cousin of Antonio, one of my favorite wide receivers of all time. I wonder if you can see the jersey. I do have an Antonio Brown jersey. Actually, I have two. But what are we going to talk about Hollywood Brown? Because there's a million things to talk about. So right now I'm just going to say he's going inside the top 7 rounds of fantasy drafts that I've participated in. His ADP is a little bit lower. His ADP is also outside the top 30 wide receivers when you look at the position. However, I have him ranked inside the top 30 easily, and I also see him go inside the top 30 frequently. So I think Hollywood Brown is such an interesting chip, especially in Dynasty. The profile of wide receiver he is, if we think he's even Deshaun Jackson 1.0, let alone 2.0, even in the run-heaviest offense, Hollywood has to be a target for our fantasy teams. He's also a perfect complement to a wide receiver room. You can add him to some safer stability that you've built into your roster up until that point, right? A player who can blow up like him. We want those wide receivers in our lineups with all the flex spots that are employed these days in different leagues. He's certainly a player who can give you that high variance in your lineup. With that said, as a dynasty owner, I do have concerns about the size. So you have to have concerns about the size with Hollywood Brown. The guy's a feather. Only one wide receiver in the last 20 years who weighed 175 pounds or less has broken 200 PPR points in a season. And if I wanted to be really mean, I'd say Hollywood Brown would be the first wide receiver in fantasy over the last 20 years to hit 150 PPR points while weighing 170 pounds or less. All I'm saying is Hollywood Brown, if he hits for Dynasty, for fantasy, he will be an extreme outlier historically. Another note we have to offer is what they did in the slot. I think it goes really under talked about, and maybe it should. I don't know yet. But another note we have to offer is Devin Duvernay comes into the fold, James Proche comes into the fold, and Mark Andrews played 60% of his snaps out of the slot for Baltimore last year. He also saw a significant portion of his production come out of the slot last year for Mark Andrews. Hollywood will have to play almost all of his snaps on the outside, I think, going forward. And he can definitely handle that. He just completely annihilated defensive backs in man coverage as a rookie. And really, he only played 37% of his snaps from the slot. I bring all this up for Hollywood Brown, the slot, because Hollywood actually tied for the most slot touchdowns in the NFL last year. 6 touchdowns out of the slot was tied for the league lead in the NFL. So that will correct itself. But at the same time, we know he's going to have to score touchdowns in a new, different way next year. And I'm not debating that he can. I'm just saying it's something to think about. The major concern, or at least when we talk about consistency, the frequency of the blow-up weeks that we want from Hollywood Brown, this passing game passed the ball only 450 times last year in Baltimore, by far the fewest in football, and the tight end group will see a significant portion of the passing share in this league-low passing pie. So last year, the wide receiver position in Baltimore saw just 182 targets, aka Michael Thomas out-targeted the wide receiver position in Baltimore, and that's only 11 targets per game that the wide receiver position split last year. So that's really, really low, and they also combined for a measly 1,419 receiving yards. That was the lowest by a wide receiver group since 2011. And we're talking about Hollywood Brown here. I loosely comped into Deshaun Jackson. Situation can be absolutely everything in fantasy football. Take 2013, comparing it to this season, for example. We can compare these talents all we want, but in 2013, Deshaun Jackson playing for the Eagles put up almost as many receiving yards that year as the Baltimore Ravens wide receiver position did combined in 2019. So it almost goes without saying that the Baltimore Ravens last year scored under 23 fantasy points. That was by far the worst in the NFL, and that's PPR, by the way. So the deeper we dive in, the more we realize we're banking on just talent with Hollywood. And even in that department with size, durability concerns, we're not 100% on board there either. So talking through this, I'm actually sort of apprehensive, but I still think that we should be confident in the draft leading up to the point where we can add in a little bit of instability and build in that high variance at the same time. But it could come down to how we attack a startup draft, right? Or a redraft, because if my wide receiver room isn't littered with volume and stability, I'm not sure I'll be able to take on the risk at wide receiver 30 prices. So, I feel bad because I spent almost zero. I meant for this to be a buy. And I spent zero time talking about his upside. Like, 10% of his catches last year went for 40 plus yards. That's pretty crazy. In the NFL, almost 20% of his catches went for 20 plus yards, and about 15% of his catches went for a touchdown last year in his rookie season. So, and not unlike someone like AJ Brown, maybe, who I fought a little bit against because of the situation, Hollywood pretty much has a monopoly on deep targets and air yards in his offense. So that's always interesting. If we ever do see this passing game kind of morph or take flight, so to speak, there's just so much upside to be had for Hollywood Brown. But it's just a hard range of outcomes to get on board with on a team led by Lamar Jackson. But this super duper ultra exotic smash mouth system, we see it does open things up in the passing game. So those big deep shots, the play action, it will be there. We know the play action is so prevalent in Baltimore, not like somewhere in Las Vegas with Gruden and Greg Olsen. This offense dials it up, the play action deep pass. So Baltimore was so run heavy that they did end up bottom 10 in categories such as intended and completed air yards. But my point is, when they let it fly, it worked. And we see that with Baltimore finishing top 10 in intended and completed air yards per attempt. So there's a lot of people that don't love Hollywood Brown. I think if you're in Dynasty, it's a lot easier to stomach Hollywood Brown, even over somebody like a Keenan Allen or something. But when you start looking at Deontay Johnson or Tyler Boyd or Jerry Jeudy or Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, Calvin Ridley, CeeDee Lamb, Allen Robinson, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, AJ Brown. Those are all guys that I've ranked significantly ahead of Hollywood Brown, or at least I wouldn't bat an eyelash to draft before Hollywood Brown. So I understand that I came out swinging with Hollywood Brown, but to be completely honest, I see where people are coming from with the apprehension, the reluctance to take on that risk, because it is exactly that. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm Tyrell Maclachlan. You can follow me at True North FFB. That's the place I'm employed by. Employed. Follow me at TNFF Tyrell. Follow the website at True North FFB, at TrueNorthFFB.com on the interweb.